Sporting's 24-25 season has been one of triumph, success and incredible achievement. But at the same time, it's been one of betrayal, of heartbreak that only football can deliver. Sporting had just come off one of their greatest ever seasons, obtaining a whopping 90 points, led by their captain Sebastian Coates, star striker Victor Gyökeres, and of course manager Ruben Amorim. The only negative of that season was that Sporting were unable to win the Taça de Portugal, making it all the way to the final, but losing in extra time against FC Porto. But it was still a remarkable season. So how did Sporting go from that to not one, not two, but three different managers in one season? And how did they nearly have their title dreams dashed in December? Well, this is what this video is for. This is the full timeline of Sporting's 24-25 chaotic season. Before we get into the transfers, the tactics, the squads, everything like that, let me just do some quick admin. Amorim did win the league last season with Sporting. However, what he did on the 28th of April in a crucial game against Porto before they'd even won the league shocked Sporting fans. And whilst many forgave him, some say that it still stained his legacy to this day. Amorim tried to sneak off on a jet plane to England, where you can believe either one of two things because none of these are actually confirmed. One, he went on a plane to West Ham to interview for their vacant job role as they just got rid of David Moyes. Two, he went for that interview to try and force Liverpool's hands, as Liverpool were also rocked by the resignation of Jurgen Klopp at the end of the season. The reason isn't 100% confirmed though, so you can believe whichever one you want. Personally, I lean towards the second option. However, he was caught by a press member at the airport, and the picture spread through social media like wildfire. What makes this story even worse, that turns out he was rejected by West Ham for Julian Lopetegui, and also Liverpool appointed Arne Slot instead of Ruben Amorim. So whichever way he went for, whichever avenue you want to believe he went through, he failed at both. Portuguese manager returned to Lisbon where he apologised to the fans and the players, saying that he had actually punished players for less, and it all seemed to be well and forgiven. However, this was made worse that Sporting actually drew to Porto that game 2-2, actually being 2-0 down and needing heroics from Victor Gyökeres and Marcus Edwards to tie the game. But following a 3-0 demolition of Portimonense and also Firmino Lacao beating Benfica, Sporting were crowned champions just a few weeks later, thanks mostly in part to 29 goals from Victor Gyökeres in the league. Sporting also only conceded 29 goals and had a goal difference of 67. When a team wins the league in Lisbon, they go to March de Pombal, which is basically a space in Lisbon where all the fans crowd together. There's a stage, there's singing, there's dancing, there's drinks, there's all sorts. But during these title celebrations, Ruben Amorim got the mic and said that he was going to stay for another year and help Sporting be back-to-back champions as he dropped the mic. He also convinced Victor Gyökeres to stay for one more season to help Sporting win back-to-back championships, but also due to their appearances in the Champions League. In that gentleman's agreement, it was agreed that if he stayed for one more year, he could leave next year for 70 million euros. His release clause is originally set at 100. So now on to the new season, and I'm actually going to start with transfers out because there was sort of a changing of the guard at Sporting, with legends and cult heroes moving to pastures new. The major shock was El Patron Sebastian Coates, Sporting's captain, who left after 10 years of loyal service, including staying after the Alkmaar attacks. He had gone on to play 369 games, the most of any foreign player at Sporting, 32,163 minutes for Osleoij, scoring 37 times, as he led Sporting to 2 league titles, 4 Taça de Ligas and a Taça de Portugal, as well as being Portuguese Footballer of the Year in 2021. He decided that while his body was still able, he wanted to return to play for his boyhood club, Nacional in Uruguay. And he also cited being closer to family as a reason for leaving. But no Sporting staff, player or fan would ever stand in his way after those years of loyal service. Also, Paulinho, a controversial figure among the Sporting fan base due to his lack of goals at times, also departed for Tolca in Mexico. Although decisive among Sporting fans, no one could argue his impact for Sporting and to Ruben Amorim's system in 23-24, scoring 15 goals in 31 appearances in the league, mostly off the bench, and was the perfect partner for Victor Gyökeres when Sporting needed a goal. In 145 games under Ruben Amorim for Sporting, Paulinho scored 53 times, including goals against Arsenal, Spurs, Besiktas, Benfica, Porto, Atalanta, and many more. Paulinho was an ultimate big game player for Ruben Amorim. He also won 2 league titles and a singular Taça de Liga. Antonio Adan was another decisive figure, but more towards the end of his tenure. His first 2 seasons, the Spaniard was immense in goal, only conceding 20 goals all season in the 2021 season, which also led Sporting to his first league title and the club's first in 19 years, but also 23 goals conceded in the season after in 21-22. But however, the 2 seasons that followed, Adan was a shell of his former self, letting in easy mistakes and almost single-handedly were the reason that Sporting were eliminated from the Champions League in 22-23, but also the reason that Sporting lost the Taça Liga final to Porto that same year. As harsh as it is to say, when he got injured towards the end of 23-24, it was a blessing in disguise, as Franco Israel took net, and while still shaky, he only conceded 7 goals in Sporting's last 10 matches before being crowned champions. But the writing was on the wall, and Adan's contract was not renewed. Elsewhere, up-and-coming talent were sold before they really made an impact in Sporting's squad, such as Fatawu and Mateus Fernandes, both being sold to Premier League clubs Leicester and Southampton respectively for 30 million combined fee. Cult hero and Sporting Academy graduate Jovan Cabral was sold to Estrela de Amadora, despite winning the Conference League with Olympiacos the season prior, and players who were considered dead wood, Vinagre, who was sold, and Sotiris, Tanrongo, Koba and Pontello were all loaned out, as were some other young stars like Dario Asugo and Rodrigo Ribeiro. Now, on to the exciting stuff, transfers in. Sporting managed to beat Brighton to the signing of young Danish striker Conrad Harder, the replacement for Paulinho, but also arguably the long-term replacement for Victor Gyökeres. However, it cost a whopping 19 million euros, which is Sporting's 3rd most expensive signing of all time. Exciting young centre-back Zeno de Best came in after playing for Belgium in the Euros and was expected to be the long-term replacement for Sebastian Coates, costing 15 million euros from Anderlecht. And Maxi Arujo came in from Tolka, expected to be a backup on the left wing for Nuno Santos for 13.6 million euros. And lastly, what was supposed to be the long-term Adan replacement, Vladan Kovacevic, came in from Racal after playing against Sporting in the Europa League for 4.8 million euros. It was clearly a long-term window for Sporting, but it was also a quiet one, as they only made 4 signings in the summer. But although they had lost a lot of veteran presence, they still had a very strong starting 11. One player that wasn't a signing, but was actually promoted from the B team at the start of the season, was young talent 17-year-old Giovanni Kenda. A young prospect who shone for the B team, he scored 11 goals in 32 appearances from the wing position, and impressed Ruben Amorim in pre-season. So the first game of the season is the Supertaça, which is the Portuguese equivalent of the Community Shield. The Taça de Portugal, which again is the equivalent of the FA Cup, versus the league winners, Sporting versus Porto. So here is the first starting 11 of the season. Vladan Kovacevic starts in goal, and De Bast and Giovanni Kenda all make their debuts as well. But Sporting remains the same up top, with the front three being Trincao, Pedro Gonçalves and Victor Gyökeres. Sporting did also have a stacked bench, with Marcus Edwards, Ousmane Diamonde, Daniel Bragança and even Ivan Fresneda on the bench. And it also should be noted, both Nuno Santos and St. Just were injured for this game, and Mateus Reis was suspended. Things started off amazingly for Sporting. They went 3-0 up thanks to a debut goal from Giovanni Kenda, but also Inacio and Pedro Gonçalves getting on the score sheet as well. But things quickly fell apart. Galeno would score what seemed to be a consolation goal in the first half in 28 minutes. But Nico Gonzalez in the 66th would actually score again. The game did go into extra time, where cruelly Ivan Jaime of Porto actually scored in the 101st minute to give Porto the win and the trophy. It must be said, it was a very poor debut from Zeno de Bast, but more so Vladan Kovacevic, the 6'3" goalkeeper getting lobbed while still being on his line. Some big questions were starting to be asked. Did Amorim lose his magic? Is the departure of Sebastian Coates and Paulinho too much for Sporting to handle? Are the signings that Hugo Viana and Federico Randes made not good enough to play for Sporting? Well, let me put it this way. Sporting won the next 3 of their games with a combined score of 14-2, beating Rio Ave 3-1, Nacional 6-1, and Farense 5-0. Again, it must be noted, however, the goals conceded were unfortunately mostly the fault of Vladan Kovacevic, as he looked nervous in goal and was succumbing to the pressure of being the new number 1. Out of those 14 goals, Videocres scored 6. The next highest would be Trincao and Pot with 2 goals each. But very quickly, game week 4 had a revenge game on the cards. It was Sporting facing Porto, but this time it would be at the Stadio Jose Alvalade. And Sporting have only made 1 change to that lineup in the Supertaça, with Diamonde coming in for Zeno de Bast. And this time there is no doubt, Sporting demolished Porto 2-0 with goals from Victor Gyökeres and Jenny Katamo. In the next game, Sporting would dismantle Aroca 3-0. But the next game is where the stage was about to get brighter for many of Sporting's players, as Sporting had returned to the Champions League after a 1-year absence, where they were dealt a tough draw, facing PSV, Sturm Graz, Man City, Arsenal, Club Brugge, RB Leipzig and Bologna. The first game against Lille is where the first injury happened. It was Vladan Kovacevic getting injured and being replaced by Franco Israel. Sound familiar? And also, due to a tactical change, De Bast replaced Eduardo Quaresma. And Zeno arguably scored the best goal in the Champions League that game against Lille. From over 30 yards out, a first-time strike going in top corner, leaving the Lille goalkeeper with no chance. Gyökeres, of course, would get on the score sheet as well, and Sporting would win that game 2-0. Besides having that last name, it was a good time to be Franco Israel, as he didn't concede a single goal in 5 consecutive league games, as Sporting beat Aroca, AVS, Estoril and Casapia. In the Champions League, Sporting would rescue a draw in Netherlands against PSV, but also beaten Sturm Graz 2-0. They'd also beaten Portimonense and Nacional respectively in the Taça da Liga and Taça de Portugal to advance into the next round. In game week 6, Pedro Gonçalves actually pulled his thigh muscle and was out for 2 weeks. In addition, Usman Diamonde sprained his ankle in game week 8 and was also out for 2 weeks. But it was on the 26th of October where a season-ending injury took place. Nuno Santos went in for a tackle against Famalicão and ending up rupturing his patella tendon, ruling him out for the rest of the season. So let's do a quick tally. In October, we've already had Saint Just, Nuno Santos, Usman Diamonde, Pedro Gonçalves, Vladan Kovacevic, all suffering injuries or knocks. The reason why that game against Famalicão is so important was not only that Sporting won 3-0, is that across the pond in England, Erik ten Hag had just been sacked from Man United after failing to beat Everton. What then happened on that day is I sent this message to my friend Kevin, asking him what the odds were of Ruben Amorim going to Manchester United, while he and my friend G responded that it was never going to happen. 2 days later, he was appointed boss. Sporting fans were shocked. Many of them felt betrayed and backstabbed. Some fans would go and take to social media to tweet, quote, "There is no point in anyone commenting on this topic until we have something official from the club. But anyone who abandons a project halfway through is not a man. He is a rat." Another added, quote, "There are many things I tolerate in life, but I cannot tolerate traitors. It's simply not a part of my values. You may have given me the best joys in the world, but if you cheat on me, you'll become a son of a bitch that I hate." Now, of course, those fans don't speak for the majority, but a lot of Sporting fans felt and still feel this way about Ruben Amorim. Even to his most loyal supporters, there was still a bitter taste in their mouths. I will say, I think it's mostly due to the stunt last year, the whole West Ham or Liverpool situation. He clearly wanted to take the next step, and if that was the case, he should have said at the end of the season, "I am leaving," instead of committing to a project and then abandoning it halfway through. Let's be honest, it's not like the Man United job is that hard to get, The amount of managers they've gone through over the last 10 years, it's easy enough to get a job there, no disrespect. But also, Ruben Amorim could have also chosen any job really, and he might have gotten it, apparently, apart from West Ham and Liverpool. But also, many fans felt betrayed as this was Sporting's most important season yet. Captain Morten Hjulmand disagreed with the word betrayal, but would say, quote, "We thought Amorim would stay for the season. Did I feel betrayed? No, that's too strong a word. We felt disappointed with his departure, and I told Amorim in front of the players. But I also told Ruben Amorim that we understood his decision." End quote. Pedro Gonçalves also said he cried when he heard the news that Ruben Amorim was leaving, as did some of the other Sporting players, who owed their career to Ruben Amorim. Ruben Amorim had 2 games left as Sporting manager at this time. 2 massive games, in fact. One against Manchester City in the Champions League, who have just come off a treble, and also versus Braga away in the league. But Sporting would be without another key man due to injury. This time, Gonzalo Inacio would be replaced by Mateus Reis. In addition, Maxi Araujo would come in for Jenny, which was a tactical change by Ruben Amorim. And Pedro Gonçalves had seemingly recovered from his thigh strain as he entered the starting 11. And what happened next was arguably one of the most unexpected wins in Sporting history. It wasn't even a win. It was an outright demolition of Man City, 4-1, with a hat-trick from Victor Gyökeres, including 2 penalties, and a fantastic teamwork goal from Maxi Araujo. Victor Gyökeres would again cement his name in Europe on one of the biggest stages of his career. In his last home game at the Alvalade, Ruben Amorim was thrown into the air, a tifo was erected, and players and fans celebrated alike. And of course, after Ruben Amorim's successful execution of his tactics against Man City, Man United fans were licking their lips, hoping that he could translate that to England. But the job was not done yet, as Sporting still had to go away to Sporting Braga, in one of the most toughest away stadiums in Portugal. In Amorim's final game at the Alvalade, Pedro Gonçalves did complain that his thigh was still hurting him, but he still said he was ready to go, and told the medical team and Ruben Amorim, who were aware of his injuries, but decided to start the winger anyway. Pedro Gonçalves would later say he wanted to play for the manager that gave him so much, and wanted to be a part of that final game. Daniel Bragança would also come in for a fatigued Morita. But in the 26th minute, after stretching for a ball, Pedro Gonçalves goes down, holding his thigh. And that stretch ended up costing Pedro Gonçalves 5 months of his career. To make matters worse, at half-time, Sporting find themselves 2-0 down to Sporting Braga, thanks to a brace from Ricardo Horta. With Sporting's biggest creative outlet gone, Ruben Amorim had to rely on the Sporting bench. Gyökeres was unusually quiet, being man-marked out of the game, and Sporting had to try something to claw back the result. Japanese international Morita was subbed on and managed to score from a corner in the 58th minute. And it wasn't until the 81st minute that Morten Hjulmand would score a screamer from outside the box to equalise for Sporting. But it would not end there, as another substitute, Konrad Harder, the long-term Gyökeres replacement, and of course the Paulinho replacement for this season, came on and scored 2 goals within 5 minutes to give Sporting the win 4-2. In which of course was Ruben Amorim's last game for Sporting. So let me set the scene. Ruben Amorim is leaving Sporting in first place with 11 consecutive wins from 11 matches. He also has Sporting in the top 8 of the Champions League new format, not losing a single game and still being in every single competition, the Taça da Liga and the Taça de Portugal. So the next appointment from Frederico Varandas had to be ambitious, because not only did Ruben Amorim leave, Hugo Viana signed for Manchester City as well. Both sporting director and manager going to different Manchester clubs, and arguably 2 of the biggest minds behind Sporting's recent success. So who would Frederico Varandas appoint as manager? Would he go for an attractive name like Graham Potter? Would he go for someone that is experienced in the league, former Porto boss Sergio Conceição? Or would he pay the release clause of an up-and-coming manager like Abel, who was killing it for Palmeiras in Brazil? Not exactly. They go for B-team manager and former Sporting player and captain João Pereira. João started working as a manager on the 8th of July 2022, only 1 year after retiring, being a manager for Sporting's under-23 teams but was later promoted to the B team manager a year later. The 11th of November 2024, João Pereira was announced as Sporting's new head coach. And while hindsight is 2020, this was seen as quite a smart move from Frederico Varandas. He brought someone who knew the club well, had the respect of the players, but most importantly played the same exact system as Ruben Amorim, a 3-back but with some minor tweaks for the wingers and the midfield. There was only one sort of small teeny tiny issue, is that João Pereira didn't actually have his coaching badges that required him to be a manager of Sporting. So he technically in games wasn't listed as the first team manager. He couldn't get off the bench and give directions, he had to get his assistant to do that for him. So he couldn't stand up during the games, he couldn't do the press conferences, he really couldn't do much of what a full-time manager should be doing. He became sort of a meme in the Sporting universe because he communicated his ideas, which seemed to be a lot, using his iPad. João Pereira's first game as Sporting manager was somewhat of a wide open layup. They had to face Liga 3 side Amarante in the Taça de Portugal. But even with a rotated team, there were reasons to be excited, as Sporting absolutely demolished them 6-0, in which Sporting played attacking, fluid football, and didn't seem to miss a beat from Ruben Amorim. João Pereira, of course working in the B team, called a few players up from that team to the main team, giving debuts in that game to Henrique Ariel and João Simões. But next game, João Pereira was thrown into the deep end. They faced a very good Arsenal side in the Champions League, but Sporting fans were quietly confident. They just dismantled Man City 4-1, and they had not lost a single game all season. Why could they not do the same to Arsenal at home? And there were a few surprising changes that João Pereira made. Marcus Edwards, who really hadn't started that many games up to that point, started against the team from his home country, replacing the injured Pedro Gonçalves. And Jerry St. Just also came in, replacing Zeno de Bast. To say Sporting and João Pereira were embarrassed is an understatement. They lost 5-1, and it could have looked like it could have been more if Arsenal didn't take their foot off the pedal. But that being said, there was room to sort of let this one slide. Arsenal were one of the best teams in Europe, and the players were still adapting to a newer system. The real test would be in the league at home to Santa Clara. There would be another injury, sort of, as Franco Israel did something he couldn't do against Arsenal. He caught something, that something being the flu, and was out for the next 2 games. So in comes back Vladan Kovacevic. Also wholesale changes to the defence and the midfield, with Mateus Reis, Diamonde, De Bast, Hjulmand, Bragança, Jenny, Kenda, Trincao, Edwards and Gyökeres taking to the pitch. But ultimately, João Pereira ball just wasn't working, as they lost 1-0 at home to Santa Clara. In fact, since that Arsenal game, João Pereira would go on to lose the next 3 games as Sporting manager, losing to Santa Clara, Moreirense and Club Bruges in the Champions League. Pereira did get his first 2 wins as Sporting manager in a row, beating a dismantled and financially ruined Boavista team 3-2, but only scraping a win. And then they faced Santa Clara again in the Taça de Portugal and beat them in extra time. But back to the league, a game against Gil Vicente ended 0-0. And unfortunately, after that game, the writing was on the wall for João Pereira. Unfortunately, on Christmas Day, no less, João Pereira was sacked as head manager of Sporting. Talk about ruthlessness. Some people hate the fact they get ties or new socks under their Christmas tree. João Pereira got his P45. However, he wasn't sacked entirely, as he actually was demoted to the B team, but still in a job, so, not the end of the world for him, I guess. And his replacement was already appointed on Boxing Day, just 1 day later. In came Rui Borges from Vitória Guimarães. Rui Borges has done wonders at Vitória Guimarães, having them second in the Conference League, only 1 place behind Chelsea, and not losing a single game in that competition. But the appointment was still seen as a risky one, for a couple of reasons. The main one being the style of play and the tactics that Rui Borges actually employed. You see, Rui Borges played more of a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1, whichever variant you prefer. And most of the Sporting players, including Inácio, Bragança, Diamonde, Jenny, Giovanni Kenda, and of course a few others, have played their entire career in the 3-back system. Not only that, the players were on an awful run of games. An awful run of form, and confidence was very low, and cracks were beginning to show. Not only that, the injuries that Sporting had began to pile up. Of course, I mentioned they lost their most creative outlook in Pedro Gonçalves, but also in Nuno Santos, who is one of the team's best assisters in terms of crosses. There'd been minimal injuries to players like Diamonde, Inacio, De Bast, Jenny, Morita, and even Victor Gyökeres. And to make matters worse, who was Rui Borges' first game against? None other than Benfica. But you do have to admire the cojones of Rui Borges, as he went straight into that game with his new fullback formation. Trincao would play as a number 10 behind the striker. Eduardo Quaresma was shifted at right back as he had the dribbling and pace abilities. Rice was at left back, and Jenny and Giovanni Kenda made up the wings. And it paid off for Rui Borges. He beat Benfica 1-0 in his first game from Sporting. Of course, Jenny Katamo, the Benfica slayer, scoring against them. It seemed that Sporting had turned a new leaf. They just beaten their arch rivals and the players were high on confidence again, and there was reason to believe that Sporting could still go on to win the title. However, that was quickly brought down very quickly as Vitória Guimarães, Rui Borges' old team, managed to draw the Sporting 4-4, as their players were furious with the former manager, as well were the fans who let him know about it. Trincao actually scored in the 93rd minute to equalise the Sporting, and things would get more difficult for Rui Borges. In only his third game as Sporting manager, he had to face FC Porto in the Taça da Liga semi-finals. But thanks to a 56th minute goal from Victor Gyökeres, Rui Borges had reached his first cup final within 3 games. But it would not be an easy cup final, as Rui Borges once again would have to face Benfica, this time in the final of the Taça da Liga. Sporting would go 1-0 down thanks to a goal from Schelderup, but Victor Gyökeres quickly equalised before half-time, but the game ended 1-1 in 90 minutes, and due to the competition rules, it went straight to penalties. And of course, someone had to miss, and that was Francisco Trincao, unfortunately missing the last penalty, which was saved by Trubin, as Benfica went on to win the Taça da Liga. But it had to be admired how well Rui Borges was doing at Sporting. He gave Benfica 2 troubled games, of course winning 1 in the league and just losing in sort of a lottery, which penalties are. Rui Borges was still respected by most Sporting fans and seemed that he had a good team and managed to turn it around from what it was before. But the month of January and February would be a horrific one for Sporting. Not only would they lose against RB Leipzig and draw to Bologna in the Champions League, they would eventually get knocked out by Borussia Dortmund, who are having a terrible season of their own in the Bundesliga, losing 3-0 on aggregate. But not only that, they would suffer a catastrophic list of injuries. Here they are in full. Gonzalo Inacio, Hiromasa Morita, Dani Bragança, Eduardo Quaresma, Alfonso Moreira, Saint Just, Jenny, Hjulmand, Victor Gyökeres, and of course Pedro Gonçalves and Nuno Santos were all out with injury, causing Rui Borges to call up a handful of youngsters such as Alexandre Brito, Jose Silva, Eduardo Felicissimo, and David Moreira, who all made their professional debuts that season. Hiromasa Morita arguably had the weirdest cases of injuries at Sporting. It felt like he was carrying a knock through the whole season. But it was actually in January going on to February that he was dealing with a significant knock and was placed on a minutes restriction by Sporting. But he was called up to the Japanese national team for the Asian Cup qualifying. Many Sporting fans felt that Morita should have rejected the call, but instead he went to play for Japan, and in the first half of his first game, he came off injured with that same knock, having to miss even more time at Sporting. In fact, Hiromasa Morita would miss 18 games due to injury, one of the most in Sporting squad, apart from, of course, Nuno Santos and Pedro Gonçalves. It was the January transfer window that arguably saved Sporting's season. Rui Borges had fallen out with Marcus Edwards. He was not happy with his work ethic and banished him from training for being too lazy. And he also recognised, while still young, Franco Israel was not the number 1 Sporting needed, especially after a poor display against Vitória Guimarães, where he conceded 4 goals. And at this point, Vladan Kovacevic was a bust. He decided that Sporting's number 1 priority should be a new goalkeeper, and that's exactly what he did. He brought in Portuguese international and experienced goalkeeper from Real Betis, Rui Silva. The Portuguese international came in and almost made an instant impact. The squad were clearly a lot more comfortable playing with Rui Silva, such as giving the ball back to him, and it felt like whenever another team were through on goal, Rui Silva would manage to save anything. The Sporting fans also recognised this, because every time he made a save, they would chant Rui. Rui Borges also brought in a winger called Biel for £6 million from Brazil, but to be honest, he didn't really do much and didn't have that much game time. He also tried to sign Alberto, a right back from Vitória Guimarães, his former club, who ended up going to Juventus, and also Garcia, who ended up going to Aston Villa. And on the outs, Marcus Edwards and Vladan Kovacevic were both loaned out to Burnley and Legia Warsaw respectively. With Marcus Edwards, if Burnley would get promoted, then Sporting would receive €12 million. In terms of league fixtures, Sporting had been given a breath of life by Rui Borges, which included huge performances from players that really didn't get a shot with Ruben Amorim, such as Ivan Fresneda, João Simões, and Conrad Harder had also been very influential in Victor Gyökeres' absence, scoring crucial goals against Florence in the league, but also Bologna to get Sporting into the next round of the Champions League, which definitely helped them financially. Sporting would win their next 3 games in a row in the league. They would beat Rio Ave 3-0, Nacional 2-0, and Florence 3-1. And after that, they had to play next game against FC Porto away. Porto had had a terrible season. So much so, they sacked their manager, Vitor Bruno. He was winless in the last 4, and also Porto had not won a game in the new calendar year, with their last win being against Boa Vista on the 28th of December. For reference, this game took place on the 7th of February. However, Porto would have a new manager in Martin Anselmi, but he didn't have enough time to implement his tactics on Porto's squad, which left a lot of Sporting fans with some cautious optimism, as Sporting had not won a game at the Dragão for many years. But Sporting's squad was still very much injury hit, with even Fresneda, João Simões, Dani Bragança and Harder coming in for Quaresma, Morita, Jenny and Victor Gyökeres. And things on the injury front would go from bad to worse, as João Simões went down in the 20th minute after a tackle from Steven Estacio, which to be fair was a fair tackle, but the youngster ended up breaking his foot, leaving him out for the rest of the season. But Sporting found an unlikely goal scorer in Ivan Fresneda as Sporting took the lead in the 42nd minute. But unfortunately, due to fatigue, and to be honest, this is the main criticism of a lot of people have about Rui Borges, is that Sporting then sat back for the next 60 minutes or so. Sporting sat back and invited the pressure on them, and it wasn't until the 90th minute, it must be said due to an awful mistake from Ousmane Diamonde where he played Samu onside, Danny Loader scored the equaliser for Porto. But the turmoil didn't end there, however. In the 98th minute, both Ousmane Diamonde and Mateus Reis were both sent off, both for violent conduct. Just when Sporting needed as many players as possible, they were now 3 down, with Simões injured and Diamonde and Mateus Reis suspended. But surely they couldn't get any more injuries, right? Well, wrong. In the next game against Aroca, Dani Bragança ended up tearing his ACL, which is the second ACL tear he's had in his career, the last one coming in 22-23. He would be ruled out for the rest of the season, and in that same game, Morten Hjulmand would give away a penalty and be sent off as Aroca drew 2-2 with Sporting. In the next game against AVS, Rui Borges made a massive decision. With 2 games without a win and limited bodies due to injuries and suspension, he made a big call. He swapped back to Ruben Amorim's 3-back formation, and whilst making some tactical tweaks, such as Zeno de Bast playing as a holding midfielder, he wanted to have a system that the players were familiar with instead of trying to implement his system so late in the season. And unfortunately, in that game, it didn't pay off, as Sporting drew 2-2 to AVS, with guess who, Diamonde, getting another red card, and AVS ended up equalising in the last minute of the game. This result also meant that Benfica had tied with Sporting in the table, with both being level on points, but Sporting having the head-to-head advantage, beating Benfica earlier in the year 1-0. If the results are the same, for example, if Sporting beat them 1-0 and Benfica beat them 1-0, then it would go to goal difference. But in this case, it was head-to-head first. But Sporting's form did turn around, thanks in part to the formation change that Rui Borges did. They won 4 consecutive league games in a row, beating Estoril, Casapia, Famalicão, and also Estrela da Amadora. They'd also won a Taça de Portugal game, as mentioned, against Gil Vicente, putting them into the next round. But they did have a tough fixture coming up, and that was against Sporting Braga, who were fighting for a European place and fighting also to finish above FC Porto. And Sporting's team, for now, was back to full strength, as much as it could be anyway. Zeno de Bast had cemented himself in the middle with Hjulmand, Jenny and Trincao made the wings, and Gyökeres was still on goal-scoring form, as proved with a goal in the 15th minute. But unfortunately, Sporting would be bossed by youngster Alfonso Patrão, who would score an equaliser in the 89th minute as Sporting drew 1-1. And Benfica won their fixture 4-1 against Porto, which means they went top of the table. Being 2 points clear, surely Benfica would not drop any more points. Under manager Bruno Lage, they did not want to drop any more points to Sporting. They wanted to see it out as smoothly as possible, and they were in the form to do so. Of course, dismantling a giant like FC Porto 4-1 does not come easy. So of course, in the next game against the Roca, Benfica drew, dropping points, and Sporting managed to win their game, putting Sporting back on the top of the table. Who did Sporting beat? The team that beat them earlier in the season, Santa Clara away in the Azores. Sporting and Benfica would win the next 3 games in a row, with Sporting beating Moreirense 3-1, Boavista a whopping 5-0, and Gil Vicente 2-1, thanks to a heroic goal from Eduardo Quaresma in the 93rd minute, which kept Sporting in the title race and kept them in first place. Came down to game week 33, Sporting versus Benfica in the league. If Sporting beat Benfica at the Estadio de Luz, they would be crowned champions. However, if Benfica beat Sporting 2-0, they would be crowned champions there as well. A draw and it would all go down to the final day. Sporting's squad has been bolstered for the final 3 games of the season, as Pedro Gonçalves has made his way back from injury, and while still a shell of his former form earlier in the season, it's still good to have someone of his caliber, especially in big games, come back for a game against Benfica. You have to remember that Pedro Gonçalves was out for 5 months, but now Sporting also had bench depth for the first time in which felt like all season. Morita was now fully fit, as was Mateus Reis, Giovanni Kenda, St. Just, Conrad Harder, Fresneda, BL, and Ricardo Esgaio. And Sporting would get off to a dream start, with Gyökeres setting up Trincao for a goal in the first 4 minutes of the game. But this was actually not a good thing for Sporting, as they now had to hold on to the lead for the next 86 minutes or so. And of course, as mentioned earlier, Rui Borges' tactics did sort of require this to happen, as it's happened so many times in so many games, including games which we dropped points against AVS and against Aroca and a few other teams in there as well. But of course, the win did not last long, as in the 61st minute, Pavlidis would score the equaliser for Benfica. And now Sporting just had to hold on and keep the draw, as they clearly weren't going for the win. And Rui Borges did that. They survived that game in the Estadio de Luz, finishing 1-1, which meant it would go down to the final day. Sporting versus Rui Borges' former club, Vitória Guimarães, at home. Braga would face Benfica at Braga Stadium on the final day. All Benfica had to do was hope Vitória drew or beat Sporting. And Benfica, of course, had to win. All Sporting had to do was better Benfica's results or just win, and they would be able to win the league for a second consecutive time. It must be noted, in the meantime, that both teams also qualified for the Taça de Portugal final, which meant arguably there would be 3 finals against each other if you include the one in the league game, which of course technically is because one of them could have won the league, but in any sense, definitely 2 title games. Sporting would be without club captain Hjulmand, who got suspended against Benfica, picking up his 5th yellow card. Apart from that, Sporting had an unchanged lineup from the game against Benfica. Unfortunately, Diamonde was injured in the first half, and he would be replaced by a new headband-wearing Saint Just. But it was a pretty boring first half, for neutrals anyway, as Sporting went into the break 0-0. Meanwhile, at Braga had actually taken the lead against Benfica, scoring a penalty to make it 1-0 going into half-time. Sporting, in the 55th minute, would be on Dream Street, as Pedro Gonçalves, who of course had been out 5 months with an injury, would score a goal that was assisted by a great cross from Maxi Araujo, giving Sporting the lead 1-0. Benfica would equalise shortly after, a goal from Pavlidis, but Sporting would quickly put the doubt to rest, and Victor Gyökeres would score against Vitória Guimarães, giving Sporting the league title for the second year in a row. Sporting had won the league by 2 points. They had overcame all the odds. There were so many people that said they could only win the league with Ruben Amorim. And after the turmoil that happened with João Pereira, Rui Borges came in, steadied the ship, and did something that no one would think he would have done, and that is win the league title with Sporting by 2 points. Not only had he done it unbeaten since joining Sporting. Sporting's only 2 losses in the league came while João Pereira was still manager. He had also won Sporting's first back-to-back title since 1952-53 and then 53-54. A crazy accomplishment for Rui Borges. But it was not over yet, and Rui Borges let his team know that. They had the Taça de Portugal final against Benfica, and Benfica were of course out for revenge. Both teams headed to Jamor, the stadium which the Taça de Portugal final is played. Sporting hadn't won a double in 24 years, and by double I mean League and Taça de Portugal, not League and Taça de Liga, which apparently doesn't count, but who am I to judge? But Benfica needed a win here to save their season, as the Taça de Liga was not enough for them. And of course, both teams wanted to win to have bragging rights over the other. Sporting would go into that game with 2 changes, as Hjulmand had come back in from suspension, but St. Just would also replace the injured Ousmane Diomande. The 2 teams would be at a stalemate in the first half, being 0-0, but it was clear that Benfica was dominating proceedings. In the first half, Benfica had a penalty decision overturned, as initially it was called for handball on Gonçalo Inácio, but VAR clearly showed that his hand was by his side, did not make his body bigger, so it was classed as an unintentional handball. Benfica were definitely the more threatening team though, as proven in the second half. Within the 47th minute, Kokshu opened the scoring with a brilliant goal from outside the box. Rumour thought he had made it too, even blowing up a balloon with the celebrations, but VAR quickly overturned it due to a foul on Francisco Trincao. While the Benfica player did win the ball first, he followed through with the studs, and VAR determined that was a foul, and the ball was given back to Sporting. Benfica began to time waste. Of course, they wanted to see out the game. It was the 94th minute, and Belotti had the ball in the corner. He was dispossessed by Maxi Araujo and Mateus Reis, and unfortunately, Belotti received a stamp on the head from his troubles from Mateus Reis, something that VAR clearly missed and should have been a red card to Mateus Reis. However, on the other end, Trincao had the ball, played through Gyökeres, who was fouled in the box by Renato Sanchez, and the referee awarded a 96th minute penalty, which of course was converted by Victor Gyökeres, and the game went into extra time. The Taça de Liga final goes into penalties, but the Taça de Portugal goes straight into extra time and then penalties if needed. From then on, it was all Sporting, as Benfica were clearly dejected after such a late goal. Conrad Harder would score a header, out-jumping Nicolas Otamendi, who for some reason threw himself to the floor, and Trincao would score the winner after nutmegging Antonio Silva and coolly finishing it in the bottom right corner, also avenging what happened in the Taça de Liga final, scoring against Benfica and managing to seal the double for Sporting. Sporting had done it. The media had said that Rui Borges was a flop. They said that Sporting couldn't do it without Ruben Amorim. They said that the old Sporting were back. They said after Ruben Amorim left, Sporting would fall into obscurity. But Rui Borges disproved that theory, not losing a single game domestically within 90 minutes, only losing one game domestically, of course, to penalties against Benfica, managing to win the league unbeaten, and winning something that Ruben Amorim could never do with Sporting, not only a cup double, but Ruben Amorim also never won the Taça de Portugal, something Rui Borges did on his first attempt. But now it remains how Sporting's future will be seen. Videocres will surely depart in the summer, but who's to say that Diomande, Gonzalo Inacio, Morten Hjulmand, Giovanni Kender has already left to Chelsea but is on loan for a season. Who's to say those players won't leave and have suitors lined up for them? As would Trincao and Pedro Gonçalves, who have been linked to Aston Villa and both Manchester United clubs in the past. Sporting may have to replace some of those players, including Victor Gyökeres' 50 goals, which of course will be a tough task. But that is a video for the future. This video is about the present, and at present, Sporting are not only back-to-back champions, but they won the double. And they have Rui Borges to thank for that. Thank you very much for watching this video. I know it's quite a long one, but I've enjoyed making these timeline videos before. So if you do enjoy it, or you want to see one about maybe Manchester United in the future, or maybe, a different team in Portugal, please let me know. I can do about Man United's 24-25 season when Amorim comes in and do a timeline of that. But let me know what you guys think. Is Rui Borges the right man to take Sporting to the top and take them to the heights that Ruben Amorim also took them? Will Ruben Amorim succeed at Manchester United? Did he make a mistake of going there? Should Rui Borges be grateful that Ruben Amorim left, I suppose? But I am a big fan of Rui Borges. I love him. He's done something that I've never seen, that my dad had never seen. Even some grandparents never seen the back-to-back, title wins. So it's crazy. But anyway, I digress. I've been Sam Fonseca. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time, and peace.